Hey there, folks. This is the MSP Lead Gen podcast, and this is episode 1 on MSP Cold-Calling Best Practices for 2023. Exciting topic. Really, it's something that our team works on every single day, and I appreciate that you've given this a click and you're considering listening and hearing a bit more. Just a quick background, in case we haven't met, in case you haven't heard of Simple Selling or myself. So my name is Derek Marin. I'm the founder of a company called Simple Selling. We do managed business development and marketing for ambitious MSPs. We've been around since 2019, so a couple of years under our belt. And this is our official launch of our podcast. So I have to totally admit that I am new to podcasting, at least from a production standpoint. I listen to plenty of podcasts. So I will definitely be doing, I'm sure I'll be making plenty of mistakes along the way. So I got to apologize up front for, for that. But I do promise to bring value and to do my very best to bring you data, to bring you guests whenever it makes sense, and just to really come prepared. So anyway, this first episode just covering 3 main points on cold calling. So the first is cold calling dead? Right. So we're going to talk a little bit about our data, our benchmarks, and also what some of our competitors have even shared publicly, just to give you a sense of that. Second point will be like, what have we found in the industry as far as like the status quo approach to cold calling and telemarketing for MSPs? What is the status quo there? And then finally, we'll finish this episode with sort of the direction that, at least we believe at Simple Selling that MSPs need to head when it comes to business development and prospecting. So would love your feedback. And I hope that you'll continue to listen to the future episodes. And cold calling is not, completely going to be, finished in this first episode. We're just kind of dipping our toes. So don't forget to subscribe if you think this is an interesting and important topic for your MSP. Anyway, take care and thanks very much. All right. So I think I mentioned, is cold calling dead? I think that's a very fair question for anyone who's considering telemarketing to look at. So before I jump into our own teams, data and numbers from last year, 2022, I'm just going to share some facts and figures that I found from our competitors. So I'm not going to name names, but these are other telemarketing, cold calling, sales, MSP specific vendors that are out there. So one of these that I went to their website and their blog. This is one that's more into the sales coaching side of things. So they'll help MSPs who are bringing in internal account execs and what have you. That's their approach. And so what they said in one of their blogs about their own performance, they said, and I'm reading now, so far in 2022, BDRs, which BDRs refers to business development reps, right? The ones doing the cold calling. In 2022, BDRs by themselves averaged just one appointment for every 337 calls. And each appointment took an average of 6.7 attempts to get. Okay. And we also know, I'm still reading here. We know from experience that this role experiences a high employee turnover rate, with 9 months being the average tenure. I just thought I would throw that in there because, it is definitely one of the harder, more difficult aspects about, I'd say, the BDR and cold calling work that we do is the turnover, which I can talk about in another episode about sort of how we look at it in our numbers. But I thought that was interesting for that to be shared. Here's what another vendor in the space, in the MSP specific, right? I'm not taking vendors or cold calling from other B2B or B2C. That's even too general. I'm getting very specific here with people who have MSP experience. So this person said, or this company said rather, now I'm reading, 300 to 1 that ratio is the ratio of dials to appointments, which translates to about one sales appointment per 20 to 25 hours of calling time. Okay. And another quote, which I thought was interesting, is this: most MSP cold calling programs generate 4 appointments per 80 hours of calling time, or one per month, is what it says there. So, or rather in 1 month, not one per month, excuse me, in 1 month. So 4 appointments per 80 hours of calling time, 1 month. Interesting. One more thing that from this second vendor, one more quote that I thought was interesting. It says, and I quote again, most programs will not generate an appointment in the first few months. totally makes sense. That is very similar to, I'd say our average, right, in the first couple of months. So that's what two other companies that are similar to us are saying, that they're metrics that they're willing to put out there into the channel. I don't think they would do that unless they could really back it up. So I thought it was interesting and relevant to share with you. For us, for our MSPs, the ones that we're doing this for, last year, 2022, we did over 94,000 dials as a whole, not for one single MSP, but for several MSPs. They all of our MSPs together closed a total of 39 agreements over the course of last year. And the average FTA, or first time appointments, for each MSP, so the average was 52 appointments for the year, for the whole year for 2022. And that's after an MSP is fully ramped up. So really, that's counting, a BDR that is already at least has 3 months behind them, right, at a minimum, for 12 months after that. Okay. So, I guess if you're thinking, maybe you're thinking, well, okay, that's great. So appointments, got it. But like, what does this mean in terms of revenue, right? And, the beauty of target, right? The right type of prospect, right? So us and our competitors, we're all doing that. We already know who the ideal client profile is for each of our MSPs. So that could be based on all kinds of factors. So let's just say, for our worst performing MSP last year, they closed only 5 agreements, right? So I would say, let's just do some of the math, because maybe you haven't had the opportunity to do that. So if you closed 5 agreements in your average MRR, say for each one of these customers, let's just say, just for simple numbers, $2,000 a month, right? That's 5 times 2,000. That's $10,000 in new MRR. Okay. So how does that look? Like, does that really pay off, right? If you're paying a company for a year and you're only getting 5 agreements, say by month 10, 11, and 12 is when these agreements actually come in, right? Does that really make it worth? Is there an ROI in that? What I would say is, think about what makes your business model so awesome, so unique, right? So many MSPs, I'm assuming many of you listening to this are already doing the math as we go. So there's a lot of retention, right? When you guys get a new customer, many of you guys are fantastic at keeping customers long term. They sign an agreement, and it could be a year, 2 years, 3 years long. And many times customers stay even beyond that, right? So if we say $10,000 in UMRR, and we're talking about, say, 5 years, right? There's already, 600,000 in UMRR alone, right? In the course of 5 years, right? And that's not even including the professional services, or like the projects that are done, especially in the first year, but also subsequent years and projects, or also revenue from hardware, which is less maybe than it used to be, but it's still revenue nonetheless. So I think it doesn't take too much work to figure out that, yeah, like, you can get a good return on cold calling, and cold calling is not dead. Okay, so I guess I maybe spoke enough about that. Let's get into the next part of today's chat, which is around, what does MSP cold calling actually look like for MSPs? And I'm sorry, I'm just going to take a quick sip of this espresso here, because I've just been talking nonstop and my mouth is already dry. So when we've been doing this for about 4 years now. I started off myself, just working alone, and I didn't have any employees, of course, just like any small business. You start off by yourselves. First couple of years was just me. But when I was starting to do research, and when I started to do the cold calling, I found all kinds of guides, right? Ebooks on MSP cold calling, and the lion's share of them focus a lot on, first you got to build a list. You got to figure out your ICP, your ideal client profile, right? These got to be organizations that fit your perfect ideal client prospect, all the demographics and the industries, the verticals, like the headcount size, like all those types of things. Makes perfect sense. And after that, right? So what is the meat of the call? Like, what are the cold callers supposed to actually say on the phone? And I took a screenshot actually of one of these guides, this MSP cold calling guides, one that's been around for a couple of years, but it still ranks very high on when you Google MSP cold calling. It's still one of the top options there. And I thought it was interesting, just to kind of to demonstrate sort of the spirit of the cold call. I just took a screenshot and I'm reading. It says, here's a scenario, right? They have the prospect, they have time and materials or break and fix agreement already in place. And then it has some bullet points here as to what questions the BDR or business development rep should be asking in this scenario. And I'm just going to read now. It says, ask when they last had a complete network health assessment. That's one bullet point. Next bullet point, ask how often they meet proactively with the team to discuss changes and trends in security and technology. Bullet point 3, ask if their business could survive a data breach and if they are 100% protected from one. And another bullet point, last one I'll read for now, ask who's responsible for their disaster recovery plan and how often it's updated. Okay, so clearly there's a lot of questions, so that's good. You do want to ask a lot of questions in a cold call, and that's not going to change, right? Because you want it to be a conversation. But what is interesting is that all of these conversations, or rather all of these questions that are recommended, are very, very focused on IT, infrastructure, cybersecurity, disaster, right? These types of things, recovery, these types of things. And this has been the predominant sort of playbook. And all the blogs and articles that I read from other vendors in the channel, be it my own competitors or others, very, very similar scripts, even from different MSP peer groups, where I was able to read some of the things that I found access, I was able to get access to from my own MSPs. What was the play, script, and it was very similar. And what's really telling is that, there's actually a survey that Datto did. I think it was in early 2022 or maybe even 2021, where they were surveying SMBs about their satisfaction with IT, and they have one of the questions was related to outsourced IT and their satisfaction. And what the SMB C levels answered was that completely satisfied was 40%, and somewhat satisfied was 43%. And very, very similar with co-managed, completely satisfied 45%, somewhat satisfied 49%. So we're talking about anywhere between 83 to, over 90, 94% are reasonably satisfied with IT, outsourced IT or co-managed IT situation. And so is that a surprise to you if you're listening to this? I imagine it's probably not. Many of you have been in business much longer than we have, and you've had customers for a long time, loyal customers, and you guys have seen your own industry evolve. The technology has evolved, right? You guys can, and I'm not an IT, I don't have an IT background myself. I'm new to the channel, as I mentioned at the beginning of this, but based on what I've learned, is that a lot of technology for MSPs has improved dramatically in the last 5, 10, 15 years. Like, you guys can do patching and remote monitoring from anywhere, right? And not to mention just the quality of all the technology that your customers have, right? A lot of things are in the cloud, and the computers and laptops that they have, that they still have, that stuff just doesn't break down as much as it used to, right? So when it comes to just IT and things working, like, things for the most part work. And so it's not so surprising, I think, that when you ask an SMB owner or a decision maker or people who are working in these small, medium-sized businesses, if they're reasonably happy, yeah, I think for the most part, IT is getting things done. And so what's unfortunate is that when it comes to cold calling, this is making it very, very difficult for MSPs to break in, to stand out, to actually have a chance to get a customer or a prospect, rather, to switch over, right? Because that's what we're talking about with cold calling, is getting the opportunity to go at bat, right? But the fact of the matter is that today, in 2023, all those prospects that you want as to be your customer, they're already customers of one of your competitors, and they've probably been so for years. And so there's relation. Not only is IT working reasonably well, but they also have that loyalty and relationship with those customers. So you have a double whammy, like an extra challenge to overcome. So here's some food for thought for you. Questions, to be going through your head here, which is, you know, and frankly, I like to describe the status quo approach as, and the name that I can't think of a more accurate description of the strategy, which is that it's a hyena approach to getting new customers. Hyena, yeah, the animal. That's right. And the reason I think that's the most apt animal to describe the status quo cold calling approach is because hyenas are scavengers. They are just waiting for something to die, and then hop on the dead carcass. And many MSPs approach cold calling the same way. They're waiting for the incumbent to screw up royally and to just hope, wish, and pray that your MSP shows up and saves the day at that exact moment. And so my question for you is, if you're going to compete in cold calling with the hyena approach here, how would this affect your prospect's perception of your MSP, right? Think about that. Put yourself in the shoes of the buyer. Another question is, if you compete in cold calling with the hyena approach, how would this affect your pricing? Pressure on pricing for you to get a customer to switch over to you. Does it help or not? And another question to think about, if you compete in cold calling with the hyena approach, how will this affect your BDR's psychology? Remember, the BDR is the business development rep, the human being who's cold calling every day, picking up the phone and getting rejected constantly. How does this approach affect that person, their performance, and their tenure, frankly, with your MSP? I think if you're being brutally honest with all these questions, you're going to agree, or I think that most of you are probably agreeing that something really needs to change. Because if we just keep going the same way, boy, is it going to be difficult to get the return, get the results, and have the math work in our favor, right? Hey, folks. Yep, this is a mid-roll commercial. I just had to introduce our company. So, look, here's a quick story. So, back in 2019, I was lucky to get introduced to an MSP. At the time, I didn't know much about your industry. I'd seen that this MSP had invested heavily in SEO and inbound marketing, and that it just wasn't working for them. And the first year or so, I have to admit that we struggled to try to crack the code. But fortunately, we figured it out. And not only is this MSP still a partner of ours, we work with many MSPs now throughout North America. And, we are focused really on just two aspects that really helps with top of the funnel for MSPs. And that is managed business development. So it's getting those appointments with first time qualified leads. And second, it's the nurturing part, right? So it's keeping these qualified businesses warm and warming them up really towards our MSP partners. So if your MSP needs help with this, just give us a call. You can visit our website. It's simpleselling.co, and you can find the link to book a meeting with us. And would love to meet you and see if maybe we're a good fit for one another. Thanks so much, and let you get back to the episode now. So what would a different strategy look like? So this gets us to the final part of the episode of today's episode, which is, what do we need to do to start doing differently? And that's what I want. That's what I want our MSPs to be thinking about, and that's what I want our team to be working on, right? Because we want our MSPs to get the results that they need, and for it to be sustainable, and for it to to work out so that everybody wins. So I have like two ideas, two little like stories, I guess. I'm not sure if you call them a story, but that kind of relates to this. So the first is, in the theme of these two stories, is to think like a buyer. We're to think like a buyer. So, for example, right? Have you heard of Tony Stark? He's that billionaire industrialist from Marvel Comics, the guy who's an inventor. So remember, he's like kidnapped, and he's forced to build like this devastating weapon, but instead he uses his intelligence and ingenuity, right, to build like this high-tech suit of armor, and he escapes captivity. Um, and so the reason I bring up Iron Man is because when I'm coaching my new BDRs, right, the ones who are doing the cold calling, one of the things I try to tell them and explain to them is that the customer, the prospect, the buyer, right, for MSPs, they want to be, they want to buy Iron Man, right? They want to be Iron Man. They want to buy Iron Man, right? They don't want to buy the high tech armored suit. They don't want the red suit. What they want is to be Iron Man. So when we're thinking about how does a buyer think and how we approach the cold call, how we approach the conversation, we can't be pitching stuff, right? We got to be putting ourselves in having a conversation in a way that helps the buyer see themselves in the way that they want to be seen, right? Helping them achieve their goals. So that's just a kind of like a mentality that the BDR needs to adopt. And I encourage anyone who's getting ready to do cold calling to think in that way. And here, so that was one. And the other sort of thing I wanted to share that's related to thinking like a buyer is a letter to a sales rep. So I just recently read this fantastic book by Keenan, who wrote this book called Gap Selling. And in his book, he actually shared a letter to a sales rep that was now I'm going to read it, written by a VP of actually a large telecom company, a VP of actually IT service management and operations for a telecom company. And I thought I'd just read the letter because I thought it was very appropriate for this topic of thinking like a buyer. So he says, "Dear salesperson, I am the customer. I have responsibility for IT operations for an $18 billion company with 30 million plus customers. Do I bet on you? Do I take a chance? I'm responsible for 100 million in OpEx budget and 100 million in CapEx. Why should I invest in your company and your product when I have many competing ways to spend company resources? I get dozens of cold call solicitations every week. I consistently work 50 to 60 hours per week, and my schedule is booked solid 2 weeks in advance. Why should I return your call, meeting invite, email? What makes you better, faster, cheaper, safer, smarter than what I have today? I have 300 plus staff. Do they have the wherewithal to learn, understand, implement the product, and derive the value of what you are selling? I have a dozen vendors I spend 3 million or more a year with. Do you know who they are and why I buy from them? I have many challenges, problems, issues. Do you know what they are? I have a strategy and a 3-year plan. Do you know what it is? Do you fit in? I have partners, vendors, and suppliers. Which one are you aspiring to be? A partner shares risk. My upside is your upside. My downside is your downside. Are you willing to share in that? A vendor consistently sells me a product or service I need at a fair price and good value and is easy to do business with. Are you a one and done, or are you willing to be there for the long term? A supplier gives me a commodity when I have many choices. Why should I buy from you on a regular basis? Price, service, flexibility? Do you have an easy button? My company has a strategy, a place in the market, looking to differentiate, striving to improve our position by increasing our lead or catching the competitor in front of me. Do you know my business, my competitors, my company strategy? I buy from those I have a relationship with who has proven themselves over time. I can count on them. I can vouch for them. Can I count on you? I am the customer. Last time I heard, I'm right. Mic drop. So, yeah, I know we're not selling to, large companies of that magnitude, but I thought his letter was so appropriate to get us all into the mindset of the customer because something has got to change to get the customer's attention. So I hope you got some value from today's episode. Cold calling episodes, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're going to continue. I'm striving to do one every 2 weeks, so hold me accountable, please. And until next time, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Signing off for today's episode. Take care.